Okay, picture this. It's a normal Sunday night, August 15th, 1971. Families all across America are gathered around the TV, watching the most popular show in the country, Bonanza. And then, all of a sudden, the show cuts out. The president comes on the screen for a special broadcast. It would only last about 18 minutes. But in those 18 minutes, President Richard Nixon made a decision that completely rewrote the rules of the entire global financial system. And believe me, the aftershocks of that decision are still hitting us today, every single day. I mean, it affects your wallet, the price of everything you buy, and the very idea of inflation itself. So, let's get into it.
You know, what's so fascinating is how Nixon sold this to the American people. He said he was doing it to protect the dollar, to make it stable. He even called it a temporary measure. But here's the kicker. That temporary measure, it was never, ever reversed. It basically set money on a totally new course.
Now, to really get how big of a shock this was, we need to rewind a little and look at the world before 1971. After World War II, most of the world was in pretty bad shape. But America had most of the world's gold. And with that power, it created a whole new, stable way for the world to handle its money. This whole system was built on what's called the gold standard. And the promise was really simple but incredibly powerful. Every single US dollar was basically just a claim check. You could, in theory, trade it in for a real physical amount of gold that was sitting in a government vault. This put a hard physical limit on how much money a government could print, right? You can't just invent more money if you don't have more gold to back it up.
The official name for this deal was the Bretton Woods Agreement, signed back in 1944. Here's the deal in a nutshell. The US dollar was locked to gold at a fixed price, $35 an ounce. Then, every other major currency was locked to the dollar. It basically made America the world's banker. And you know what? For about 25 years it worked. The world saw incredible stability and economic growth.
But then came the 1960s, and that solid promise started to get some serious cracks. See, America was trying to do two huge, very expensive things at once: fight the Vietnam War overseas and fund President Johnson's massive Great Society social programs back home. And to pay for all of it, the US just started printing dollars. A lot of dollars.
And this right here, this slide shows you the heart of the problem. By the end of the 60s, you had about 80 billion US dollars floating around in other countries. But America, we only had about $10 billion worth of gold in Fort Knox. The math just didn't work anymore. The United States had basically written a mountain of checks that it simply could not cash, and the rest of the world was starting to get very, very nervous.
One of the first leaders to really call this out was the President of France, Charles de Gaulle. He saw that America had this unique power to just print paper money to pay its international bills, something no one else could do. He famously called it an exorbitant privilege, and he decided he was going to do something about it. And what he did was incredibly dramatic. I mean, he didn't just call and ask for France's gold back. He literally sent French warships to New York Harbor to go pick it up. This set off a huge chain reaction. All of a sudden, other countries like Germany and Japan panicked, thinking the gold was about to run out, so they all rushed to trade in their dollars too. It was pretty much a global bank run on Fort Knox.
Okay, so this all leads to the final breaking point. In early August 1971, Britain put in a request to convert 3 billion of its dollars into gold. Now, that one single request was big enough to wipe out a massive chunk of what little gold America had left. Nixon was trapped. He had to do something, and he had to do it fast.
So after a top-secret weekend meeting at Camp David with all his economic advisors, Nixon went on TV that Sunday night and dropped 3 bombshells. First, he slapped a 10% tariff on everything being imported. Second, he froze all wages and prices for 90 days. And third, the big one, he temporarily suspended the ability of foreign countries to exchange their dollars for gold. He slammed the gold window shut.
Now here's a wild twist. The very next day, the stock market went crazy. In a good way. The Dow Jones had its biggest one-day jump in history up to that point. It seems like the public and Wall Street just breathed a huge sigh of relief that a crisis had been avoided. Almost nobody realized that the fundamental nature of money itself had just been changed forever. But this created a brand new, massive problem. If the dollar wasn't backed by gold anymore, what was it backed by? What gave it any value at all? Why should the rest of the world keep using it? The Nixon administration needed to find a new anchor for the dollar, and what they came up with was, you have to admit, a stroke of geopolitical genius?
And the answer they found was oil. They created a new arrangement that we now call the petrodollar system. The basic idea was to replace the world's need for gold with the world's desperate, unquenchable thirst for energy.
So here's how they pulled it off. The Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, cut a secret deal with Saudi Arabia and the other big oil-producing OPEC nations. It was a simple trade. The U.S. offered them military protection and advanced weapons. In return, they had to agree to sell their oil only in U.S. dollars. Think about the result of that. Every single country on Earth needs oil, which meant that now every single country on Earth needed U.S. dollars to buy that oil. Boom! Global demand for the dollar was locked in, maybe even stronger than before.
And that brings us right up to today. So what have been the real, long-term consequences of that Sunday night decision back in 1971? Well, you could call it a 50-year hangover, and it affects your money directly, every single day.
So, first up, inflation. Once the dollar was disconnected from gold, the government could basically print as much money as it wanted. And the result? The US dollar has lost a staggering 87% of its purchasing power since 1971. To put it another way, what you could buy for just $1 back then now costs you almost $8.
And what about gold? You know, the thing the dollar used to be pegged to? Well, while the dollar was losing value, gold went from that fixed price of $35 an ounce to over $2,400 today. That's a 68 times increase. It just shows you the massive gap between a hard asset and a currency that can be printed into existence.
And then you've got the national debt. Without the strict discipline of a gold standard, government spending and borrowing just exploded. The U.S. national debt has multiplied by 800 times. It went from about $400 billion in 1971 to over $34 trillion today. Those are numbers that would have been physically and structurally impossible under the old system. This new age of what we call fiat money, that's money backed by nothing but a government promise, it made things possible that were once completely unimaginable. You know, the trillions of dollars printed to bail out the banks in 2008, the trillions in stimulus checks sent out during the pandemic in 2020, those are a direct legacy of the decision made in 1971. And it's really no coincidence that something like Bitcoin, with its hard, fixed supply, was invented in 2009 as a direct philosophical answer to a system of unlimited money printing.
So, it all leaves us with this one giant question. Was Nixon's decision a necessary evil? Did breaking free from gold unleash the economy and allow for all the growth and innovation we've seen since? Or was it a catastrophic mistake that doomed us to a future of permanent inflation and an ever-growing mountain of debt? Honestly, there's no easy answer. But what we know for sure is that the financial world we live in today and the very nature of the money in our pockets was forged on that one Sunday night in 1971.